the RTÉ Rugby World Cup podcast, sponsored by Bank of Ireland.
Hello and welcome along to the RTÉ Rugby World Cup podcast, the final RTÉ Rugby World Cup podcast before we go back next week to just the plain old RTÉ Rugby podcast. A bit of housekeeping first up. Obviously, we've been coming to you a couple of times every week, Tuesdays and Thursdays over the last 8 weeks or so. From next week, we'll be back to our usual one-a-week podcast. So for those who may have started listening to us during the World Cup, we hope you do hang around. We've been having great numbers over the last 8 weeks, and we hope to keep those up as we start looking back on the URC next week and the Champions Cup, and then into the Six Nations next year as well. So please do come back and join us for our podcast, usually up on a Wednesday afternoon. So we hope we'll see you then. Back to the job at hand, though. And Johnny Holland and Bernard Jackman are with me to look back on Saturday's Rugby World Cup final. South Africa, 12-11 winners against New Zealand. We'll also reflect a little bit more later on as well on the World Cup in general and Ireland's campaign and what comes next for them. But Birch, we're more than 2 days out from the final now, and the hot takes have been starting to bake in the oven over the last couple of days. The knives coming out for South Africa's style of play all of a sudden. I'm pretty sure I know what your opinions are on this anyway, having seen you on Saturday night and on Against the Head last night, but it seems to be deja vu all over again, where South Africa have pulled off a remarkable World Cup success, and here is so much of the conversation just around, they're kicking too lot, the style of play isn't good enough. What are your own thoughts on that for those who haven't seen them yet?
I admire them. They have a way of playing that's natural to the way they're brought up, and the way they play the game, from schoolboys into universities, into professional or into clubs, and it works. It's successful, and I actually admire them for sticking to their guns. I don't think any of us should try and dictate what's beautiful and what's not about in rugby. I think there's lots of different ways to skin a cat, and I think there's beauty in their play as well, in their conviction, and how they implement it, and it's obviously been successful for them. But even if it wasn't, if they lost that final by a point, they wouldn't second guess themselves. They totally believe in that, and it's up to other teams to be able to beat them. And unfortunately, for the others, their defensive effort, along with obviously the set piece pressure they bring, the kicking game, the goal kicks, it's a very strong set of ingredients to try and win. So yeah, I know some people might say it's pleasing on the eye. I wouldn't like every team to play that way, but I like the contrast as well, and I like how they do it with absolute commitment and application, which is second to none. So no, I think full credit to them, to be honest, and it's a massive achievement what they've done. It's
the old boxing line, like styles make fights. You want to see contrasting styles going up against each other. And Johnny, like, I tell you what, it wasn't the prettiest game of rugby on Saturday that we've ever seen, but I don't think anybody could have sat through that final second half, and I think the final 20 minutes in particular, and not just been absolutely gripped by the tension, by the physicality, by the stakes that were there, and how every tiny little mistake seemed enormous in the grand scheme of things. I don't know what your thoughts on it were. I was absolutely enthralled by that last quarter in particular.
Well, I was too, and I think, like, you said it there, that people give out about the style and everything else, but I'm like Bernard. I think there's a beauty of some form in there. I know I'm a former back and I'm an attack coach, but like, that's part of attack, knowing that you need a set piece, knowing that you need a kicking game, knowing when to kick the ball away. Like, I think the defense was so strong that they didn't actually really want to play with the ball that much. They wanted to play on transition attack, so there's a lot of clever plays in there from South Africa that people don't realize. And then, you think about teams that haven't gotten through the knockout stages very well, obviously Ireland included in that. And you think about what South Africa do differently, and they put everything into their set piece. You can't win a tournament without a set piece like them. Now, their set piece didn't go for them in the final. I think they had a scrum against the Head, lost, didn't they? Which is very unlike them. The New Zealand scrum was class. Obviously, their scrum and line out is very good as well, and they've gotten to the final. So you think about what makes teams a knockout animal, and what gets them there is your scrum, your line out. Even with Dion Fury coming in there, they were very clever around that. It didn't shake them at all. The first one I think he threw to the front of the line, just got out of there. Curtly Arnside had another fast line out that I don't think they'd have taken in another game, but because Dion Fury was on the pitch, they were prepared for things going against them. And I think that's the big difference in that, they're a big set piece team, but when the set piece goes against them, they're also prepared for that. They don't really freak out because, it's been so good. It's a bit of an outlier and they rely on the rest of their game. But their kicking game, Pollard 13 out of 13, their differences, like New Zealand didn't kick 100% in the final. And these are the big differences between the teams. But like there's an ingenuity in the way that South Africa play as well, and there's a braveness around what Rassie and Jack are doing, the way they defend. You won't see other teams defend like that and be comfortable with it. It's very much outside their the players and the defenders' comfort zones, but they just make it look so comfortable. Like,
and it was one thing you mentioned there, obviously the set piece. And this day last week, I was on with BJ Botha and Mike McCarthy, and we were talking about just how dominant that South Africa scrum was against England and how that's the springboard to them winning a World Cup final. And Birch, the interesting thing about it was, and it also shows the adaptability that South Africa had, was that they didn't have set piece dominance at the weekend. At the scrum, because they lost Bongi Mbonambi early on, Dion Fury came in after 3 minutes. And while the scrum went fine in the grand scheme of things, they didn't have a dominance there. At the line out, they lost 4 out of their 10 throws. So they had to find a different way to go about winning this game. It wasn't a case of getting themselves a scrum 40 metres out, milking a penalty and allowing Handré Pollard to kick at goal. They had to find different ways of doing it.
Yeah, and that's what's most I admire most about them, is that probably going into the game, they probably felt, well, obviously when Bongi went off, it changed a little bit, but that they would have had set piece dominance. But and then to not actually have that, not be able to get those entries into the game through being able to milk a penalty in your own 22 off a scrum, not having a regular supply of line-out ball, they didn't miss a beat. They just found other ways to get possession. And I think that's what's so admirable about them, is that, or so admiring in them, is that they are rock solid mentally, and you don't win 3 games by a point with everything going your way. They're just so comfortable going to those last 20 minutes, whether they're ahead or behind, and everybody stays on plan and they just find a way to win. And it's incredible. It's the one thing you'd want to put into teams, but there's no magic ingredient. There's no course you can do. And you can get teams fitter, you can get teams stronger, but having a team that don't panic and just find a way to grind it out is phenomenal.
You were on Against the Head last night, Birch, and one of the main things you were talking about was just how aggressive and how hardworking they were in defence. There were so many examples of it across the 80 minutes, right from the start, where you have Eben Etzebeth absolutely milling Richie Mwanga with an unbelievable tackle inside. I think it was the first tackle of the game itself. And that's and it comes right down to the end where you have Faf de Klerk diving for his life to clip the ankles of Dalton Papali, and then over on the far side where you've the knock-on being forced. There were so many examples of just tireless work, not even just to make dominant tackles, but to make any kind of a tackle.
Yeah, no, it was phenomenal. It was 1-15, and and then obviously everyone who came off the bench. It's just, look, there's no team who go into a World Cup final and don't put their bodies on the line and give it everything, but it's their ability to do it under extreme conditions. Like, the ball and play time was high, 38 minutes, the pressure of a World Cup final, knowing that one error could basically cost you. But yes, they scrambled when they had to scramble, but more importantly, and this is absolutely key, they pressurized the All Blacks into mistakes that the All Blacks tend not to make, and it's not by chance. Some people call them unforced errors, but I see them as forced errors because of everything they bring, that unorthodox type of defense, that ability to make big hits, like I showed last night with Peter Steff or Estebet, the jackal threat or counter-ruck threat on the edges. It's phenomenal. And I look at this system isn't vastly different than the one that won them the last World Cup. And every defense coach in the world can study that system and copy it if they want, but no one goes to the extreme that the Springboks do, because it's nearly impossible to get players to buy into it to that level and to do the work off the ball. So like when you mentioned, go down the Faf got that Tampa attack on Papali'i, there was cover coming, and wherever you do, there's cover coming. Even the All Blacks try. I mean, it's a good pass across over the top to Leia. But it's 4 Springboks absolutely herring it towards that touchline. And it's incredible by Talia to basically beat 4 people to get that pass away. And that's kind of what you have to do to beat that Springboks defense, is you need an individual who can do something extraordinary, because they're not going to let you score easily. Also, they're very, I would say, they play the laws to the absolute limit. I mean, is there an argument that maybe there's a yellow card before that, for repeated infringements? They get water carriers onto the field at the ideal time for them. I would say they push the HIA rules to the limit during the competition to get breaks into people. And like, just think about the Jesse Creel head contact with Sam Kane. No HIA there because they've no sub back, and you think about during the competition, they've been saying, HIAs, we always want to get players off. And particularly with their forwards, I mean, they were able to get guys on and off quite well. So they do push the allows to the absolute limits, and they won the World Cup by a point. And so you have to say as well that ruthlessness, that game smarts, that playing on the edge is also a factor. It's also a factor. And that's probably how mean you have to be to win a World Cup.
I don't want to make it too much about Ireland, but Jonny, like, do Ireland have that killer instinct, that will to push things a little bit beyond the limits, to chance their arm a little bit?
Yeah, I don't know. I think in hindsight it's a bit different. I think there was a complete different style around what they were doing. It was a very clean approach, wasn't it? And it was all out attack. It was lovely kind of phase play and everything else, and finding holes and stuff like that. So I don't know. I think you'd have to set yourself up very differently to kind of compare and contrast that. Like, wouldn't you? I think there's a killer instinct in people like Johnny Sexton, like, so I don't think there's a lack of ruthlessness there. I think they were kind of ruthless with their attack and play in one sense until it didn't work at the very end, like, but I think there's I think Ireland you see a lot of clips in behind the goal and stuff like that, where you see Gary Ringrose swinging all the way around in attack and he makes up serious ground. He does it in defence as well, but so you can compare it and say, yes, they do have those kind of efforts in them as well. But the Cheslin Colby one, where Ricky Owen is going into the corner, and Curtly Arons actually got him out anyway, didn't he? But Cheslin Colby passed out Andre Pollard in the backfield cover and just decided he's going to get him. And I think Bernard, you showed that in Against the Head last night. It's just an unbelievable clip of kind of desire. And I think the way South Africa bring their people into it and everything else, I don't think it's just kind of words. I think you can see the way they're celebrating and they're going touring South Africa and everything else. I think it does mean a lot to them, and you can see that coming out in their play. And I think Razzie has done that in all of his career. He just gives them kind of a higher power, a bigger reason to do the things that they do, and you find something extra mentally, like Bernard has kind of touched on. But I was disappointed in one part of their play. I think they did 3 or 4 drop goal attempts when they weren't on. Like the Andre Pollard one was possibly the right decision because of the time in the game and who he is, but I think there was some outrageous decisions from 50 meters with a wet pitch. There was 5 and 6 second ruck averages, wasn't there? Ruck speed averages. So there was nothing going on, and they decided to kick drop goals. I think Willemse had actually open field, or Cheslin Colby, I can't remember which one of them was, had open field in front of them for a counter attack to get into the opposition half, where they could buy their penalty through attack and play, or they can kill the game over there. But they decided to kick a goal, which I just didn't really agree with. I know one of them goes over and you think they're geniuses, but they were low percentage plays, so I was kind of disappointed with that part. But the rest of it, you have to absolutely commend. Like,
yeah, I disagree, Johnny. I thought it was genius. Okay, I thought it was no, but it's them, and I'm flipping it, right? So they're and I look at, they were low percentage plays, absolutely, but I actually think as long as the ball went dead, which it did, except for the one that Pollard got blocked down on, which was actually, as you say, was actually ironically the best chance and the best guy to do it. I think that's absolutely soul destroying for the All Blacks, because effectively it burns the clock. It gives the Springboks a break, and they have to go again from a similar position. Okay, from a goal line dropout, it can be a 22 dropout, and the ball can go further. But I I think you put yourself in the mind, and I spoke to one of the Argentinian coaches after that first game against England. Now, George Ford was kicking him over, right? But it basically spooked him that anywhere in their half, effectively, it doesn't even have to concede a penalty, that these lads could add 3 points. And in that game, 3 points was going to be, a lovely cushion. So in terms of a game, yeah, for sure, it doesn't make it a spectacle. But I thought it was perfect game management by them, given they were ahead. But I agree there were low percentage shots, but I think they weren't thinking about that. They were thinking about the outcome would be that the All Blacks had to go back and basically go under the post again and come back out with a new plan. So
I get that kind of feeling as well of like being able to score anywhere. So if you exit out of your own half, no matter what, I understand that part. There's a pressure building there that you wouldn't think about when you're looking at the game.
Yeah.
But I think there's also, when you get an easy trot from someone like Colby or Willemse into at least 10-meter line, they're already in their own half anyway without the ball. So I do get it. I think the Andre Pollard one, because he got blocked down, actually put them under serious pressure. It was Peter Smith-Tide actually made a huge hit there, didn't he? So funnily enough, that was the best one, like you said. But yeah, the other ones, I get that as well. It's a different way of looking at the game from their eyes, and that's what we're so that's what we don't understand when you look at the game through South African lenses. It's different, like, with the way Radley and Jack think, it's absolutely completely abstract and different. But I think they could have burnt the clock in a different way too. But
sure, just to go full circle on my point around that gamesmanship, like I don't think every team now needs to go, oh, let's be South Africa, because you can't do it. You just need to find out. You need to find out what way is going to win your World Cup in 4 years' time. Now, South Africa have been able to have a similar type plan, and with a lot of the same players, to be fair, and it's worked by the tiniest of margins. But that's not necessarily going to be the way the next World Cup's going to be won, and that's the challenge, Neil. So I don't think we all need to become cynical and try and really push the laws to the edge. What we were doing was a very effective way of playing, and we only barely came up short. And who's to say we wouldn't have beaten, wouldn't have won a final? But the reality is, it's not about what won this World Cup; it's about what will win the next one. Is the key.
You mentioned obviously earlier on, Birch, 3 1-point wins in a row in the knockout stage. So if you combine it all together, South Africa had the toughest pool. If Ireland and Scotland, certainly by the world rankings anyway, it was the toughest pool in the World Cup. They then had the hosts in the quarterfinal, beat them by 1 point. They had England, the only Northern Hemisphere team who've won a World Cup, in the semi-final, beat them by a point. And they had the 3-time winners, the All Blacks, in the final, beat them by 1 point. Stuart Farmer, who's a brilliant rugby statistician, pointed out yesterday, or it might have been the day before, it's the first time since England in 1937 that a men's test side have won 3 games in a row by 1 single point, which just shows how remarkable a run that is. All of those things considered, Johnny, I might go to you first. All of those things considered, is this the best World Cup win out of the 10 we've seen?
Yeah, I'm not old enough to see all 10 of them. But no, I think it's remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable what they did. And you look back at 2019, they lost their first pool game and they went down and won it. In this, they lost to Ireland, and you think you could get spooked. And Bernard said there that this was, maybe this isn't the way to win the next World Cup. But, I thought this year was the year where France and Ireland, New Zealand to a degree, but not as much. I thought they were going to move the ball around and kind of kill this way of playing, but South Africa showed that it's still knockout rugby and you can still win it their way, and they have done that. I think the way they've done it, losing to Ireland, who were world number 1 at the time, and then going through the rest of it, France were unbelievable in that game. That was probably the best match of the tournament, was it? I think it was anyway. And to do it just repeatedly, they didn't run out of steam. I think they were, possibly getting there by the end of the final, running out a small bit of steam, but they actually just closed off the game to a degree. If they had to go and win it again, I think they might have had another gear. I think it's been, I suppose I can't say objectively that it's the best one ever, but as far as I can remember, it definitely is.
Birch?
Yeah, I think it is. And you look at what they've done, I don't think any team has had such a hard path to it. Don Lennon last night was being at every final, I think, was saying for him it's probably the second best final in itself, because I don't know, some people are saying it was a crap final, but
I don't get that.
No, I know, but I trust his judgment, having been at them all, and he said '95 will probably never be matched because of the Mandela and underdog status and the first World Cup back for South Africa. But he thought Saturday night was up there and probably second. So I said I trust his judgment.
Yeah. But like obviously the style is a very subjective thing, and I get some people might find watching that kind of rugby a little bit boring. But what's really, really impressive about it, and it was the words you used, Jonny, as well a couple of minutes ago, they did it their way. If you look at nearly everything they've done over the last couple of months, from selection, whether it was going back to August and picking their squad where they had 2 hookers and played most of the World Cup with 1 out-and-out hooker. They had 4 scrum halves and only used 1 in the final. They obviously 7-1 was a talking point the whole way through it. There were so many things that they did throughout the last couple of months that no other sides are doing. And it's very, very impressive to plough that kind of lone furrow and be the one standing out and making so many bold calls and having the balls to stand over it at the end of the day.
I think that's the best part of it, because like I haven't seen a 7-1 before that. I don't think. I haven't paid much attention to it anyway. It might have been there, right? I think once or twice it was discussed around this preparation. But even standing over something like that, you're completely on your own, vulnerable as a coach. I think anyone that's coached would understand this more than people just kind of throwing it out there. Replacing a hooker with an out half when you've only one other hooker. I think Dion Fury is the unsung hero of the whole thing. The way he didn't flinch. You know, Bernard, you said there that they didn't flinch in general. I think he didn't flinch. He was unbelievable. Just got on with his job. And yeah, they absolutely did it their own way. But you know, I think even Razzie can do all that, put himself in the limelight, people waiting to cut him down. Like he's putting his English Bulldog on his Twitter when they're playing against England, you know, just kind of getting that out there, putting Bongi Mbonambi as his header on Twitter, on X. You know, he kind of messes with things as well on top of that like he really puts himself out there as well as the tactical stuff. But people will talk about like, you know, creativity and they think it's a backline play or a breakout from a lineout. His creativity around rugby is unbelievable. All the while actually sticking to what makes rugby union, you know, so like scrum, line out, maul, line out defence, their actual defence, kicking at goal. They're all the things that makes rugby union its own variation. Like, you know, it's not league or it's not touch or throw the ball around, you know. So like they've done it by the absolute fundamentals of rugby union, but in their own creative way. And I think it's you know, to put yourself in the limelight like that and actually go and back it up and win it is unbelievable from a coaching perspective. But from the whole group, to be fair, they were all bought into it, and that's his and Jack's biggest strength, I think. And I think there's a bit of they complement each other to a degree. You can't have all the Razzie without Jack. It just wouldn't work, like, you know.
Yeah, and that's what's going to be really interesting, Birch, is to see how Jacques Nienaber, how he acts and how he coaches and how he goes about things when Razzie isn't there. We see all the mad selections, and you're always, I think a lot of us kind of assume maybe that it's Razzie Erasmus making these calls because he is a bit of an eccentric character, but there has to be a bit of Nienaber in there as well, in the innovation and the creativity and making some of those interesting calls. It's going to be really fascinating to see how much of that he brings to Leinster now.
Yeah, it's going to be. It looks like an inspired choice. I mean, because obviously they knew they were getting a good coach. Players who worked with him in Munster spoke incredibly highly of him. He was the key man in the last World Cup, but he definitely has had a bigger role in this one. And listening to Felix Jones, listening to Sia Khaleesi, I spoke to Dion Fury about him after the France game, and they were just waxing lyrical. And he definitely has a bigger say than maybe we give him credit for. Particularly the tactical side of things. Razzie might be the one who makes the final say on selection, or we're sure that. I think it is Razzie probably who has the big say on selection. I think Jack is always very respectful for Razzie in terms of what he's done for him, in terms of bringing him from being a physio to being the head coach of a country that won back-to-back World Cups. But by all accounts, he is absolutely obsessive about the game. Bobby Skinstad was telling me that when he got physio back in the day, he'd be rubbing his hamstring and he'd actually have the TV on looking at defensive sets. And he wasn't even the defense coach, you know. And apparently when he tries to sell something to the team in the box, he always says, I've seen this before, because he reckons the game actually, while it's evolving, it kind of goes around in circles. So
Sure.
things that worked 20 years ago or were tried 20 years ago kind of come back in combined with something else. So like that Leinster dressing room, let's be honest, it must be crying out for that new voice now, with Stuart obviously having gone, and let's failing really to get those trophies that they certainly feel that they had a good shot at winning. Someone who's done that in at the highest level, coming in with that experience, that confidence that his methods work. It can only be good for Leinster, and I think it can be good for Irish rugby as well, because obviously if he can convert that team who play brilliant rugby all year into being able to lift European trophies, well, that will add to the confidence that we can have going into Six Nations and next World Cup, etc.
And Jonny, you mentioned it in your column today on RTÉ.ie. Like you were able to work with Razzie and Jacques Nienaber for a short time, obviously, before you were forced to retire. But even in that little period, you got a taste of what the two of them, and specifically what Nienaber is like.
Yeah, and it's a very personal thing. That's what I was speaking about. It's I only had a couple of sessions. Well, I say a couple of sessions now, but it was 6 or 8 very intense weeks of them taking many sessions per day. And Jack always talked about the line in the sand, like draw a line in the dirt, and he beats you or you beat him. And it's a very kind of there's a lot of feeling around that. It's very kind of there's an emotional response around your defense and everything else. But I think someone like him going into Leinster again, we speak with Ireland having that kind of clean look. It's all very nice. They win the game by loads of points most of the year, and then it comes down to the nitty gritty, and they can do that as well. But I think it's going to be something to challenge the status quo, which I think they do unbelievably well. Razzie and Jack and South Africa in general. I think the players will get challenged more than ever. But like Bernard said there, he was a physio and then video analyst, wasn't he, before he came in to be a coach. He sees the game from so many different angles, and he has seen the game from so many different angles. It's data driven by all accounts inside there as well. So it's a very informed. He's not just going to say something and try and get buy-in and it runs out of steam because players see some cracks in it. It's thought about every different way from different angles with his different hats on, and I think that's the thing that's so commendable about the whole thing. But it'll be interesting to see how he dirties the Leinster game plan, and how he kind of makes them. I wouldn't say nasty. There's nothing nasty about how they play, but those that inverted commas, like make them a tough team to play against. Which I don't think they're a tough team to play against at the moment. I think they play a lot of nice branded rugby, and they're well able at set piece and everything else as well. But he'll bring a different dimension to them. It's going to be interesting to see if he can kind of drive on his own coaching status as well.
So that's a nice point to probably move it on to reflections kind of on the wider Irish campaign and what's coming next in 2024. And warning, I don't know, did you see Pat Spillane says we're all cheerleaders, the Irish rugby media. So this is your opportunity now, lads, you really have to dig in on this one and prove people wrong. On Ireland, what are the priority positions going into 2024 that need to be fixed? And I think out half obviously probably don't even need to speak about it, because it is going to, like, Johnny Sexton isn't here anymore. So that will be addressed, whether it's going to be addressed right or wrong, or if Jack Crowley or Ross Byrne or whoever gets the opportunity takes it, remains to be seen. But across other areas of the pitch, where do Ireland need to start finding younger options, develop more options, develop depth rather than just kind of stuff for the future?
Who takes that on? That
go on. Well, loose head prop, obviously, and tight head prop, and I think you probably solved both of them with the same time, that you have to look at maybe Porter moving back across to tight head once you find another couple of loose heads. I think that's easier. I'm looking at the tight heads that are in the pathway, and we're not very rich there, particularly ones who can go and do what needs to be done at the top end. And this isn't simple, because you look at England, right? England, where scrummaging has always been a big part of their game. They had to go back to Dan Coles for the semi-final, and then their backup, the tight head prop Sinclair, who's a British and Irish line, who's been around for a long time, you could argue isn't that dominant tight head scrummaging prop that you may need at the highest level. So that, like, I'm being incredibly demanding here of what I think we might need. So because I think that's effectively what we should be doing. So I think we will end up in a situation where Porter may have to move back across to the tight head side, and then we need to fast track and find some more loose heads. And I think there's two in Leinster that have huge potential now. I'm thinking 4 years time, so there'll be 24, 25, Jack Boyle and Paddy McCarthy as just two, but obviously there may be more out there in the system. But the reality is there's only a certain amount of athletes or rugby players in every country that can get it done at the top end, and that's what we need to be focusing on. I think we'll always produce lots of players who can be really good in the URC. We can produce lots of teams who can be really good at under 20s level, but it's the 3 or 4 that we're going to need to find that can come into the team in 4 years' time and actually be match winners. That's the challenge, and that's what David Humphreys, if he takes over from Nucifora, that'll be the big job he'll have to do to support Andy Farrell in terms of trying to find those and manage those. And I think there's probably in a couple of weeks' time, there's a big review of this cycle, and I think it's going to be incredibly positive, and there's no blame on any of the coaches or players, because I think they put together a very good campaign, and I don't give a shit what Pat Spillane thinks about it. The reality is they lost a game against the team who very close to winning the World Cup. So I'm not judging on that at all. I'm just thinking about, if you're going to be really high, if you're going to have a real high performance mindset, you're going to look at the whole way the game is set up here and see what we're doing to expand that player pool, see what we're doing to find better athletes, see what we're doing to I suppose increase our depth. So Dion Fury is an example, right? And again, like, there's no, some of that was luck. Like, Saru didn't plan this. I mean, he left South Africa for financial reasons because he thought he was never going to be a Bok, right? So, and he went to play in France, and he ended up playing in Grenoble. So that's how I know him in Pro D2 as a 7 who could play hooker. But he played in Lyon, and again, he's not your stereotypical top 14 back row because he's not a line-out option. But he got lots of game time, was good off the bench, etc. And he ended up coming back to South Africa, probably just because he could. I know, because his time in France was done, and the Stormers contract was a way of reintegrating back. And yes, he becomes a key player in a World Cup final with that experience, with that edge. And you heard Jacques Nienaber talk about him. He's known him since he was 20 and believed in his character. And he becomes captain for a few minutes when C is in the bench, right? So, and their demographic is players in Japan. And some people said, oh, how can you go to Japan and come back and be at the level required to win a World Cup? Well, maybe it's perfect. Maybe that's absolutely perfect for 2 seasons, and the All Blacks have done it plenty of time with guys taking sabbaticals. And also, I think, and I'm getting quite broad here, but is it better for our youngsters to go, right? But to be managed by their RFU and find them opportunities to play in different leagues and a different competition if they're being blocked in a province? Because I actually don't really agree with moving players from one province to another that much. I think it's nice to be a Munster man playing for Munster, or a Leinster man playing for Leinster, or Connacht man playing for Connacht where you can, or Ulster man. I think you want to have a high percentage of those. So I'm not in favour of just getting the Leinster Academy and sending them all over the place. But I think we can be better. I think we can be better at actually increasing our player pool by getting some players off our wage bill, right, here, which allows a youngster to play, right? A youngster to play who has the quality. So suddenly, in 4 years' time, you may have 15 more players to pick from, but also you have players who maybe pick up valuable experience abroad and ideas and come back with those ideas, because we kind of give Razzie and Jack unbelievable credit, and they deserve it. But you can be sure that Faf de Klerk is picking up stuff, when he's played away. Mossert, Quagga Smith, all Dean Vermeulen having been in Ulster, like all these guys coming back into the pot for a period of time can be actually quite exciting as well, So there's the whole cohesion, which we obviously have, and everything's perfect and we can do camps whenever we want. But there's other ways to look at it as well, that maybe we have to look at. And maybe they'll draw a line through them and say, no, that won't work for us, which is absolutely fine. But we probably do need to have that review where we look at everything. And I said, it's different from the normal World Cup review, which I think we just said, oh, that was wrong. Oh, we did too much S&C, or we got a selection wrong, or whatever. Whereas I think all that stuff would be pretty right. It's what we can do as a country to try and equip ourselves for, or whoever the coach is next time, to have a better player pool in terms of depth, but try and find those 3 or 4 players who can make a difference.
That's Johnny, there's an interesting point in there on, like what Bert just saying, where if you look at South Africa and you've so many different rugby cultures that end up coming together into the Springbok team when guys have been away, whether it's in France or Ireland or England or Japan even, and eventually they come back around. And a lot of people might want to see Irish rugby completely open their doors and allow players go off to France or England and still be selected. There will be others that don't want to see that happening because they want to see the best players playing in Ireland. Is there a sweet spot somewhere in the middle where, I don't know, some people have mentioned, the RFU investing or buying London Irish, for example, and that seems a bit far-fetched considering the losses that are in the Premiership, and you're kind of chucking good money after bad. But is there potential some way to form a strategic partnership with 1 or 2 clubs in England or France, where there is a kind of or even down in New Zealand, like having players down in Super Rugby in New Zealand or Australia, where they're getting the opportunity to go down there, and there's an understanding that, a player is there might be a 2-year loan option or a 12-month loan, and someone can go down and experience game time, and if their path is potentially blocked in Ireland, and still have the opportunity of coming back, and for the IRFU to still have some control over their development.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it too deeply until Bernard went into that, and it actually makes a lot of sense.
Neither did I, to be totally honest. This is back in the beer mat stuff here.
Yeah, but when
we can leave it to another week if you want.
No, John Ryan is a perfect example of that. I know he was at the later end of his career, and I don't know how you manage it when there's someone up and coming and they might get into the system a little bit faster if they stay and all the rest of it. But I played with John. I was messaging him a small bit, but not a whole lot. And like, you just get the idea that you think about things very differently when you're inside in the same system all the time. Even when you're an injured player. When I was injured, I didn't go into any meetings with Munster. You just don't go into them anymore. And you actually look at the game very differently. You look at your own games at the weekend, and you're kind of going, why are we running that? And you see different teams kind of doing something different because you're just out of that system a small bit more. And I think obviously that gets accentuated when you're actually away somewhere and you get different learnings from different people. I think the hard part there is the control over it, so if you have it very strategically aligned, will the other countries play ball because they know what you're doing and you're getting a lot out of them? Or how do you manage those players? Who has control over them? When do they come back? Do they miss opportunities and someone jumps them in their own province all of a sudden? Because there are, I wouldn't say bolters, but there are players that just get opportunities, 1-2 injuries, and all of a sudden they're in. So you do want to make your own leagues and country as strong as possible, but I definitely think there's something in there if they can find some way to control that. But going back to what do we need to do going into the next World Cup? I think I had a very very critical kind of thought around it. Like I think it goes back to the fact that this was the massive opportunity, the best Irish team to go into a World Cup, and they fell short just about. And we can, that can be looked at kind of softly and no criticism. But for me, when I looked through that team and I was thinking about who would replace, Tadhg Furlong and who would replace the Johnny Sexton one is obviously wide open. Like, we don't know. Jack Crowley obviously came from nowhere to be his backup all of a sudden. People will talk about Sam Prendergast, but there's probably someone else out there at the moment that could well be that next Jack Crowley by the next World Cup. So we actually don't even know where that player pool is at the moment. But when you think about the influence that, James Lowe, Mac Hansen have had, Bundy Aki, Johnny Sexton, you think about like the strength and depth that you had at second row, despite James Ryan getting injured for the crucial one. I think he would have added massively to it. It's very hard to see a stronger squad than that, no matter how well rugby goes in the next 4 years for Ireland. I know Lou said you'd like to have had more game time into Killer, maybe another option at Lou said, another option at tight head, like Bernard has said. You'd like to replay it again and see if a younger out half had come on and just throwing the cat amongst the pigeons and see where you land. Possibly you don't land in the right spot, but it's very, very hard to see Ireland being stronger than that. And that's where I kind of come out of, you come out of writing about it for the whole World Cup cycle, and you're heading into another one. I don't have those answers, and I don't know. It looks like an uphill challenge to get a stronger squad than that. But that's why the likes of Andy Farrell and maybe David Humphreys are in those positions, because they maybe can see it, but it's an uphill challenge to replace some of the players at the moment. And as well, I don't know how long Peter O'Mahony has left, but within all these players that play lovely rugby and play very effective stuff, you have to have the dog inside there as well. Very intelligent rugby player, by the way, very intelligent at set piece, but having that mindset in around the team as well, very, very hard to replace these people. And I think that's the massive challenge. What's going to get to the next World Cup even better than this group? Because we thought they were mentally rock solid with Andy Farrell. We thought we had more depth than ever, and all of a sudden we're still falling short. So it's going to be a real challenge. But there are some key positions, like Bernard has said, that we just need to get even stronger at. It just isn't strong enough to go and win a World Cup against teams that have a set piece that are going to rock the whole tournament.
As Johnny said there, Birch, like we thought we had more depth than ever, but is the issue that we didn't trust the depth or didn't use the depth? Like Andy Farrell has spoken in the last couple of years about how you need 50 players to win a Rugby World Cup, and he's gone to great lengths to try and develop that with extra games in New Zealand, A matches against in the RDS last year, the Emerging Ireland Tour. But still, when it came down to it, like he's given the opportunities to develop the players, but when it came down to it in the crunch situations in the World Cup, there was a reluctance to use them and to trust them in the moment and to see whether they sank or swam. And you look at, bring it back to South Africa, you look at South Africa and against Ireland, Eben Etzebeth goes off after, I know he had been carrying it up, but he went off very, very early in the first half. In the World Cup final, he goes off after 58 minutes. And either John Klein or G. Snyman came on. I can't remember which one came on for him or Mostert. If Eben Etzebeth was Irish, he's playing 80 minutes probably, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, we didn't have the players. So Farrell has done as much as he can.
But also as well, like you look at someone like Jean Klein, he's not a proven test player, but Rassie Erasmus and Jacques Nienaber trusted him to go in and do that.
Yeah, he's different. You know what you're going to get with John Klein, and full credit to him. And he has had a big role in South Africa winning the World Cup. But I think he's. You kind of know. I think you know what you're going to get with him, and he complements what they have, right? So, and I think it's brilliant for him to see him win a World Cup. Obviously, having been snubbed by Ireland, and that was a decision. But I think coaches need to be able to make that decision. Farrell needs to say, "Does he suit us? No, he doesn't." And Rassie goes, "Well, he suits us."
No, sorry, I don't mean like this. I'm not kind of saying like, should John Klein have been in the Irish squad?
Yeah.
Look, it can be a very oversimplistic argument with that. But it's more that, when it came down to it in a crunch game in a World Cup final, South Africa have shown they're not afraid to use the bench. They're not afraid to put in players like Dion Fury as another example. As we said, 12 months ago, he was only, or just over 12 months ago, he made his test debut in his mid-30s. Yeah. And there he was covering as captain in a World Cup final. More often than not, Sia Khaleesi played the full game on Saturday, but they've been taking him off early in the second half in a lot of games because they had trust in the person behind him to go in and do the job.
Yeah, look, I know what you mean. I actually don't think Farrell. Fury's an interesting one because he looks like he's a complete left field selection, and he was as second hooker, but realistically, they thought they had Malcolm Marks, and he was going to be, a nice option for some of the other games. But when he needed to do it, he did it, and he get that, with someone who's been around the game a long time. I mean, I kind of talked about his journey, and maybe I didn't do him credit. Whenever he played in Grenoble or Lyon, he was very, very good. He just didn't have the height. He wasn't a big scrummaging hooker, or he wasn't the height that you would want as a seven in France. So he wasn't a line option, and that probably stopped him having an unbelievable career there. But he was still a very effective rugby player. I think the challenge is, and you look at this. Let's look at England. Let's look at England, South Africa, and Argentina, who finished 1-2, or New Zealand, who finished 1-2-3. Realistically, they've been trying to find players for the last 4 years, right? Okay, like we have, right? And when it came to the crunch, the back row was for New Zealand was Shannon Frizzell, Artie Sevilla, Sam Kane. The locks are Barrett, Whitelock, or Brodie Retallick. You know what I mean? The same players stay for 10 or 12 years unless someone pushes them out. And realistically for us and the Boks, the reason they won it was their bench. You know, they could afford to have Vincent Koch pick up not train Monday and bring in Trevor Nakane. You know what I mean? They have Oxenishé, who would start for every other team, I believe, on the bench. They have RG Snyman. RG Snyman, show me another country that he doesn't start. He starts for the All Blacks, I think. You know what I mean? So they could leave Cobus Reinach off the squad. He can go 7-1. Like that's the reality of it. We have tried 50 players. Farah's done everything in his power. He's had them all in camp. He's created an unbelievable environment. But the reality is, unfortunately, there's no point having 50. You need 25 or 26 who can win you a game in a World Cup and we maybe didn't have. I don't think we had that. I don't think Farah had that, and that's not just his fault. That's one, they're not coming through. Two, he needs them to prove themselves at European Cup level to a certain extent. Like Dion Fury was a very, very good Super Rugby player for all his career. You know what I mean? So I'm not like, he wasn't plucked from nowhere either. He was just obviously a massive gamble as a hooker. But again, I think if Malcolm Marx is fit, that never happens. It's Bongi and it's Malcolm Marx starting and Bongi coming on, or vice versa. So and they would have found a way to get Pollard out there. Pollard would have, one of those nines would have been injured at training, and so Pollard was coming. But again, how they played that and how, like, I think you try that in any other country and player, or you take Libok off after 31 minutes, you know, there's a sense of distrust between the management and the players. Like, there wasn't a peep out of anybody. You know what I mean? You look at some of the celebrations of the Boks, like just when you see some of the players that you forget about who were in that 33-man squad, who got very little game time, but that was the way, and everybody bought into it. So look at, yeah, I'm big on at the moment. My big thing is we don't need to produce 70, 80 players. We need to produce 25, 26 who can interchange, can start or come on, and are good enough to beat the All Blacks or South Africa or France in a knockout game. That's the challenge. And that's not that, like, Jesus, I'm not saying it's easy or anyone made any mistakes in the last 4 years, but that's something that we need to try and make sure we do everything in our power to make certain we give ourselves the best possible opportunity of doing for the next one.
No, just one thing on that.
Go ahead, Jonny.
The Jesse Creel resurrection was unbelievable. Like, he won't get the credit either. When you look back at the World Cup, you know, you think about other people, but when you break it down and some of the analysis the lads have done and some of the defensive closing that he's done on transition and things like that, he was always such a good athlete. You see the shape of him as well. Like, he's an unbelievable athlete. But Lukanyuam was the kind of face of their last World Cup win, wasn't he? And everything that he did in transition and defence. And sure, they just didn't need to bring him back. Like, I know he struggled with his own injuries and form and everything else. They just didn't need to actually force him in the way they did with Andre Pollard because of what Jesse Creel has done. So there's a couple of unsung heroes within that as well. I'm sure they'll be massively respected within the group, but give it a month and people won't remember what they did in the World Cup. I think he'll be one of them. So you need to mark that down. He was class for them all tournament.
Yeah, definitely an unsung hero. Final couple of minutes, and I'm trying to finish this up because people might notice I'm leaning more and more to my side here as we're going on. The sun is creeping through the window and it's starting to blind me. This is what I look like if I sit straight in front of the camera. To wrap it all up, guys, from each of you, on a nice positive note, your abiding memory of Rugby World Cup 2023.
Memory, goodness. I think
what he's thinking about it, I'll stick with what I did last night. So for me, it was Portugal, Fiji. Tier 2s have struggled in general. A lot of hammerings, but Portugal built all the way through and got that win at the end. So for me, it was seeing Samuel Marquez kick that conversion to win it for them in the celebration afterwards.
Yeah, I think from an Irish perspective, beating South Africa, who have gone on to obviously win it, that was a huge moment. I think the Andre Pollard kick in the semi-final for him to win the game and to come back from very little minutes is class. I was thinking about a couple of moments, and Bernard took that Portugal Fiji one, Fiji Australia one. They're going to be the ones that everyone's talking about. I think they've been class. From Ireland's perspective, unfortunately, are talking about beating South Africa in a pool game, you know, which isn't exactly where we want to be. But they have beaten the back-to-back World Cup winners. And I think the 38 phase slog, obviously it's a New Zealand positive and an Irish negative, but to go that close down to the wire in a knockout game, you talk about how we're too light on them, but like they gave us something different going into this World Cup. Absolute expectation. The bandwagon was strong. The expectation was high. They still gave us something. To some of the games that I've been most nervous about watching rugby in the last couple of years, I don't really get like that around the international team. I don't know, since playing maybe or whatever else it is, but I got fully back into it and they gave us a lot. There's loads of memories in there, but I think Andre Pollard kicking goals has to be up there too.
Sticking through with your fellow kickers. For me, it's just anything to do with Pool C. Pretty much every game in that pool was just a mad ride from start to finish. So more of that, please. Even if the draw was as lopsided as we've been complaining about. Fellas, thanks a million for joining us this morning, and thanks for the last few weeks. It's been a hell of a shift across all these podcasts, and hopefully we'll have you on again talking URC in the next few weeks. A reminder, Leinster against Edinburgh and Munster Dragons is a URC doubleheader on RT2 and RT Player this Saturday. Also on Saturday night then, you have Connacht taking on Ulster at the Sports Ground, and we will have a reaction to all of that next week on the RTÉ Rugby podcast from next Wednesday. So do join us then. Fellas, thanks a million.
Thank you. See ya.
The RTÉ Rugby World Cup podcast, sponsored by Bank of Ireland.